Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to wait for folks to enter our press conference, and we'll be starting shortly. Thanks so much for joining us today. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to our team behind the scenes for welcoming us with that energizing music and this incredible event that we're here for today, which is reintroducing the Southeast Asian Deportation and Relief Act. My name is Quinn Din. I'm the Executive Director of Southeast Asia Resource Action Center, SEARAC, and I'll be facilitating today's event along with my partner, Nancy Witten, the Strategy Director of the Southeast Asian Freedom Network, SEAFN, as co-authors of this bill. And to kick off our event, we actually would love to see where folks are joining us from. So we will have the moderator share a poll with you and asking folks where you're joining us from, the West Coast, the Midwest, the South, the East Coast, or maybe even overseas. So we'll give folks just about a minute to join us in sharing where you're coming from. And as panelists, we see that we have 46 attendees with us, so we're really excited to be celebrating this event with folks. And I'll go ahead and close the poll so we can share with the community who's joining us. Awesome. So we see from our poll that we have representation from every region of America today, from the East Coast to the Midwest to the South and West Coast. East Coast is representing strong, and maybe it's also because it's noon, but we also see folks from overseas. And we are so proud and so honored to be sharing space with you all today for this incredible event. And to start us off, we'll be hearing from impacted individuals. You will be hearing from SEARAC and SEAFN as co-authors of the bill. But first, we'll hear from our legislative champion, Congresswoman Judy Chu. For folks who may not know, Congresswoman Chu represents 28th congressional district, which includes Pasadena and the Western Gabriel Valley of Southern California, home to 5% of the Southeast Asian community nationwide. And while this might seem small, she has been a huge champion for our communities, winning stays of removal for individuals fighting their deportation cases, and today, our lead sponsor of this bill. Congresswoman Chu, thank you so much for your leadership and your partnership with communities here across the country and across the world to really see this reintroduction to the finish line. I yield the floor to you, Congresswoman.
Thank you so much, Quinn. Yes, I'm Congressmember Judy Chu from California's 28th Congressional District. I also serve as the chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, or CAPAC. I'm honored to join you all today to reintroduce the Southeast Asian Deportation Relief Act. Southeast Asians from Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam comprise the largest refugee population ever resettled in the United States. But for years, many of us in Congress have heard directly from Southeast Asian American constituents in our districts about the devastating impacts of our broken immigration system, which has left over 15,000 individuals from the Southeast Asian American community at risk of deportation. Most of these individuals resettled in the United States as refugees. In fact, many of these individuals were born in refugee camps and have never even lived in their countries of origin. So many Southeast Asians sought refuge here because their families allied with the United States or were forced to flee violence and genocide during the Vietnam War. Numerous Hmong migrants from Laos fled their country because they had worked with the CIA during the war and were at risk for persecution. In Cambodia, they fled the Khmer Rouge genocide, but no matter the reason, all of these Southeast Asian refugees deserve our support and the peace of mind that they will not be forcibly removed from their homes here. Upon arrival to the U.S., many Southeast Asian refugees were initially resettled into struggling and impoverished neighborhoods. And still coping with significant trauma from the war, Southeast Asian American young people disproportionately faced bullying and anti-refugee discrimination. Without adequate socioeconomic or mental health resources, community members made mistakes or were swept into gangs and violence, often tied to keeping their families safe, housed, and fed. This was the case with Hai Nguyen. Hai was born on a fishing boat in 1982 as his family fled from Vietnam to the Philippines. His family arrived in the U.S. 2 years later as refugees. Like many refugees, Hai struggled to integrate into his community. He grew up in a poverty-stricken neighborhood in Long Beach, California, where he fell in with the wrong crowd and made a terrible mistake as a teenager. But Hai has since served his time, and since being granted parole, is now a valued and trusted employee, a mentor to at-risk youth and formerly incarcerated individuals, and a loving and supportive son and brother. However, in 2015, Mr. Nguyen was ordered deported to Vietnam based on a single criminal conviction committed as a juvenile. Although a diplomatic agreement between the U.S. and Vietnam previously barred the deportation of Vietnamese refugees who arrived in the U.S. prior to July 12, 1995, the last administration undermined this agreement by beginning to deport such individuals. Deporting Southeast Asian American refugees who have already served their time is a cruel and inhumane form of double punishment. These are men and women with deep roots in their communities who have lived in the U.S. for decades as lawful permanent residents. Many have family, including U.S. citizen children and spouses, and are leaders within their communities. They have checked in with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, dutifully over the years without any issue, despite having an order of removal hanging over their heads for decades. We cannot risk letting future administrations create policies based on bigotry and hate. So I'm proud to stand with you today to protect our country's promise to our Southeast Asian refugees by limiting the Department of Homeland Security's ability to remove members from these communities and send them to countries where they have often never even lived. The Southeast Asian Deportation Relief Act will prevent deportations of Southeast Asian refugees who arrived on or before January 1st, 2008. It will ensure access to work permits for these communities, and it will reduce the fear and burden of regular check-ins with ICE by replacing them with 5-year gaps between check-ins. Additionally, this new introduction of the bill includes the opportunity for Southeast Asian refugees who were previously deported to come home to the United States. Instead of cycles of violence and family separation, this legislation promotes healing and family reunification. We must restore the humanity to our immigration system and turn away from mandatory deportations that do not take into account an individual's full circumstances and betray our duty to protect refugees resettled here and call America home. I am grateful to reintroduce this critical piece of legislation today, and I want to thank the Southeast Asia Resource Action Center and the Southeast Asian Freedom Network for your tireless support and advocacy on behalf of the Southeast Asian American community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Chu. And for folks who have just joined our press conference, Congresswoman Chu will also be staying until the end of the press conference to answer any questions. So I want to welcome folks again to our virtual press conference of the reintroduction of the Southeast Asian Deportation Relief Act. We are joined today by 70 attendees from across the world and this country. And I wanted to actually just pause to ask where folks are coming, how folks are coming to us today. If folks are coming to us as a community member, as a policymaker, perhaps a member of the media, a student, or something else, and you can share how you are identifying in our chat box today. I'll go ahead and give folks just about another 30 seconds or so to reflect on how you would like to share your response, and then we'll share it out with the entire community. And Jenna and our team, go ahead and close the poll and let's find out how folks are joining us today. Awesome. So it looks like the majority of folks here are coming from a community-based organization, and that a third of us are identifying as a community member or impacted person. Perhaps you have a deportation order yourself or your family members are impacted by this issue. And we are so, so grateful that this bill is based off of our lived experiences as a community to really fight back against the trauma of decades of violence through these deportation orders. We also say that we're being joined by media, policymakers, students, and other folks in other roles within the community. Thank you so much, Jenna, for sharing those results. And I just want to thank you all so much again for joining this incredibly historic press conference. Today with SEAFN and with all of you, we're standing proud with over 50 endorsing organizations from 14 states across the country, from every region of our country, much like our participants today, from the West Coast, the Midwest, East Coast, South, and District of Columbia. Today, we're here to fight for our right to family and our right to heal for the over 15,000 Southeast Asian Americans with final orders of deportation, who are part of the largest refugee crisis that the world had ever seen after US involvement across wars in Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. They're part of the 1.2 million refugees who fled war-torn countries like my parents, who risked their lives not knowing if they would live or die so that today I could be free. This is our community's unique American legacy, the largest community of refugees ever resettled in America. With our over 15,000 community members, we support this bill that sees our people, người tị nạn, refugees, who are uniquely devastated by our immigration policies and becoming free from final orders removal for crimes of poverty, youth, and survival served decades ago when they were in communities that weren't equipped at home or at school to help heal from the traumas of war, genocide, displacement, poverty, and racism. With this bill, we hold our over 15,000 community members close, and the decision you made to transform, to bring love into our communities through the soulmates you married, to the beautiful children you brought into this world, and the refugee parents you take care of every single day. We know the trauma and the injustice you've experienced every day for decades, not knowing if one day your family could be torn apart with a deportation order to a country that you fled as a refugee. That's why in partnership with the Southeast Asian Freedom Network, we are so proud to support a bill that centers the lived experiences of impacted individuals and their families, and that address the unique harms that Southeast Asians have experienced to restore your right to family, your right to work, to feed, house, and protect your family, and your right to peaceful procedures as part of the largest refugee community ever resettled in America. This bill is not just a historic legislative moment, but a community victory to write our community solutions that expand equity and justice in America. When this bill was first introduced last year, it expanded relief from detention and deportation to Lao and Vietnamese individuals, and for the first time to Cambodian individuals as well. Today, we celebrate an updated version of this bill that goes further to include the over 2,000 Southeast Asians who've already been deported by ensuring that they have an opportunity to come home to the US and be reunited with their families. This bill is a huge move forward, a testament to our community's power and our longer fight for justice and healing. Thank you to Congresswoman Chu, Congresswoman Jayapal, Congresswoman Loughran, and Congresswoman Presley for your leadership and partnership with our communities. Thank you for fighting back against injustice to the Southeast Asian community by working to keep immigrant and refugee families together, and today for championing policy solutions like the Southeast Asian Deportation Relief Act for a compassionate America, an America that recognizes that the support to refugees isn't just about arrival, but spans the generations it takes to both heal and honor the strength and resilience our communities of survivors have held as part of a beautiful and just America. And with those remarks, I want to welcome to share remarks Nancy Witten from the Southeast Asian Freedom Network, our fierce partner and incredible leader as part of this bill.
Thank you, Quinn. We've been organizing now for 2 decades, locally and throughout the states. We've been fighting to keep our families together and stop Southeast Asian deportations back to Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. And today we're so humbled to be here with SEARAC and House Representative Judy Chu to reintroduce the Southeast Asian Deportation Relief Act of 2023. Again, my name is Nancy Wynn. I go by she, her, and I'm the strategy director of the Southeast Asian Freedom Network, or SEAFN for short. We are a network of Southeast Asian-led grassroots organizations across the country working towards gender justice, queer justice, healing justice with an abolitionist framework. The SEADRA bill is a critical part of seeing this vision through. Since 2021, the ideas that would become this historic bill were formulated in conversations had in backyards, at family gatherings, in living rooms and workplaces, and virtually, directly impacted Southeast Asian community members who live with deportation orders with their deep lived experience and wisdom helped craft the bill to accomplish the following. The bill would permanently authorize employment eligibility in the form of work permits with a 5-year renewal period, end in-person ICE check-ins and establish 5-year gaps between check-ins, and again, limit the Department of Homeland Security's authority to detain and deport Southeast Asian refugees from Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos who arrived in the US before 2008. Importantly, this 2023 version incorporates new key demands that came directly from our impacted family members and leaders who have already been deported and who are watching this live stream now from Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. So we want to say to you, your demands were heard. The new bill includes 2 following provisions. First, the right to return. This new bill is strengthened to ensure that the Southeast Asian refugees who were previously deported can return home to the US through a streamlined and expanded process to reopen their deportation cases. Secondly, it allows Southeast Asians to vacate removal orders. Southeast Asian refugees who are still in the US and face deportation can now fight their underlying deportation order so they can remain in the country. These 2 additions greatly expand the relief options for both our family members who are living in the US with removal orders and those who are already deported. Again, we want to emphasize that we would not be here introducing this bill without the hard work and the heart work of generations of Southeast Asian organizers, impacted leaders, and the organizations that support them around the country and in Southeast Asia. This has truly been a collective effort, and we're only at the beginning stage. But before I go any further, I want to introduce one of our impacted leaders who've been agitating and activating and serving as a mirror for so many of her community in Boston in particular, Chilan. A few words by introduction. Chitlan is an impacted leader and organizer with the Asian American Resource Workshop, a member of SEAFN. Chitlan and her family fled Vietnam after the war in Southeast Asia in 1981, and for the past 40 years has been living in Massachusetts with her 9 children. Incarcerated for almost 3 years, since her release, she's dedicated her time as a community organizer, working with the Vietnamese community to fight against Southeast Asian deportations, supporting other impacted community members who are at risk of deportation to come together to fight for a second chance for life and for justice. So, Chitlan, if you can come on.
Thank you, Nancy. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lan Lee, and I'm 52 years old and a Vietnamese refugee. I'm the oldest child in the family of 6 siblings, a single mom of 9 children, a grandmother of 4. I have lived in the United States over 40 years, with the past 20 years living in Quincy, Massachusetts, but I'm now at risk of deportation to Vietnam. I am a working, loving, caring, sharing, supporting, and cooking mom, and a respectful, generous, and kind person to my community and neighborhood. I am a community organizer with Asian American Workshop at SEAFN, working with them to fight to end Southeast Asian deportation. I'm here today to share with you my story and why the Southeast Asian Deportation Relief Act is so important to me. In 1981, I was 9 years old when I was forced to leave Vietnam because of the war of Southeast Asia. My family risked all of our life to escape Vietnam to find freedom and better future. My family, myself, and 146 other people escaped Vietnam on a small boat while my mother was 6.5 months pregnant. It was a traumatic 3-month journey where I witnessed others get killed because our boat was being robbed. After we arrived to Macau refugee camp, my younger sister was born, and we stayed in the camp for 1 year before we settled to the United States. When my family and I resettled to the United States, we have a really difficult time adjusting to life in the new country. We did not know English. We couldn't access resource or service to help us to adjust to living in the new country and rebuild our life. As the oldest sibling in the family, I need to take on a role of caretaker for the rest of my siblings while my parent went to work. I have to grow up a lot faster than most children at an early age. I have to learn how to cook, clean, and work while going to school to support my younger sibling and my family. In 1993, as a young adult, I was involved in a crime, arrested, incarcerated for almost 3 years. I was absolutely tore being away from my family and kids. This would have been of my biggest regret in my life. But since then, I have understand and realized that I make a serious mistake and have worked hard to transform my life for me and my family. I lost so much time with my children, but it has been exciting to see them grow into who they are today. Some of my children have become a teacher, constructor work, a pharmacy, an engineering, and a police officer, and are some about to go to college to being working towards a career. I want to be here with them to see them graduate. I want to be here when my children get married and have kids on their own. Even after transforming my life, I was afraid that ICE will rip me away from my family and community because of the mistake I made decades ago. My story is so similar to many other Southeast Asian community members I organize with who are facing deportation. We have spent a majority of our life in the United States, and many of us have no tie or connection to the country in which we and our family fled. Our community needs the Southeast Asian Deportation Relief Act. I have witnessed how others impacted by deportation. And as someone who is impacted, living in fear of deportation is struggling. It is tear community and family apart. We are building a movement to fight Southeast Asian deportation. We need this bill to be passed and deportation for all, and for us to find relief. We need a second chance at life. We need SEADRA to be signed into law so we can rebuild our life and future. We need hope and dream. And seeing SEADRA supported and passed will show us that we can still have hope and dream for our life and future. Thank you for listening to my story.
Thank you so much, Dylan, for sharing your incredible remarks and your courage and the audacity for community members to have courage and to have hope in spite of the terrible trauma that you and our families are living in. So we are so grateful for your incredible remarks and for sharing us with that story. The lived experiences of community members with deportation orders always reminds us that it's not just about that individual, but the entire family and the entire community that they're a part of. And one of the areas that we have great hope is by seeing the stories of return. And for that analysis and for those stories, I am so honored to introduce Sophia as our next speaker. Sophia was a co-founder of One Love Cambodia from 2015 to 2018, which was a volunteer-led movement that advocated against the unjust deportation of Khmer refugees from the US to Cambodia. As a leader of this movement, Sophia led the fight for Khmer deportees' right to return in order to reconcile with their families and communities in the US. Her efforts blazed the trail for her own successful reinstatement of permanent US residency and return to Long Beach, California in 2022 after her deportation in 2011. Alongside her social justice and advocacy work, Sophia also served as a full-time educator, teaching English in Cambodia for 8 years. With her residency reinstated, Sophia is now pursuing a BS in Family Social Service at the University of Minnesota to better serve her community in her capacity as both an educator and social justice advocate. Sophia, thank you so much for joining us today, and we are so honored to have you.
Thank you so much, Quinn, and thank you everyone for having me today. My name is Sophia, and I am a first-generation Cambodian refugee who was displaced in the US during the war in Southeast Asia at the age of 1. My mother was separated from her family, single and alone, in a foreign country, and had to fend for herself and raise me on her own in San Antonio, Texas. I grew up in Long Beach, California, carrying the trauma she endured, not understanding why she was never happy or loving, and why I didn't have any grandparents or any other relatives. I never knew the pain and suffering my mother had gone through. I had to grow up quickly and didn't have much of a childhood because I had to navigate this American life with my mother, foreign to her, but it is all I have ever known. Questions of identity have plagued me throughout my life. Though I was the first in my family to complete an American high school education and attend college courses, I continued to struggle to find place and meaning, which led me down a self-destructive path. I made mistakes in my youth, and years later in 2011, they would result in my deportation to Cambodia, the same country my mother desperately escaped from due to the American military violence in Southeast Asia. Even though I had already served my time and paid my debt to society, I was torn from my own US-born son, who was only 8 years old at the time. He must now endure his own trauma from the decade-long separation that we experienced. Rebuilding our broken relationship is so hard because deportation prevented me from being there physically to raise him. The pain of deportation is immeasurable. As refugees of war, my family and I had to endure the trauma of displacement and separation not once, but twice. For the Southeast Asian community, deportation feels like a great injustice. We are refugees of a conflict that saw the United States inflict a campaign of illegal bombings on Cambodian soil. As a result, we were adopted by the US, where many of us struggled with the trauma of war, and we were then disowned by the same country for our debts to society that had already been settled. Effectively, we were punished twice for not belonging. This experience has deepened my appreciation for my community. We have endured great loss and trauma, and yet I have witnessed, personally experienced resilience and hope in the face of despair. But we should no longer have to be resilient. Now woven into the American fabric, we deserve to live in peace and with justice, without the fear of deportation and being separated from our homes and our families. In 2020, I received a gubernatorial pardon from California's Governor Gavin Newsom, which allowed me to reopen my removal order. Then in 2022, after nearly 11 years away from my home, the Department of Homeland Security agreed to join my motion to reopen and dismiss my immigration case, which reinstated my US permanent resident status. I was very fortunate to be able to reunite with my family. Even though I had to rebuild my life once again, at least I am home with my son. We all have the right to be at home with our families. Now, with my residency reinstated, I am now pursuing a BS in Family Social Science at the University of Minnesota to better serve my community in my capacity as both an educator and social justice advocate. I am living proof that I simply made mistakes like any other human being, and I did not deserve to lose my life and my relationships to deportation. I'm excited to join others today at the House reintroduction of the Southeast Asian Deportation Relief Act. This bill will serve the specific needs of Southeast Asian refugees, and that will ensure families can live without the fear of separation and have a true chance at life. This bill will give confidence to our community that we will not serve double jeopardy and be punished repeatedly simply for being displaced and not belonging. It will start the healing for our community in a humane and justified nation where we will finally feel safe and dignified. Thank you all for listening, and I appreciate every second of your time.
Thank you so much, Jitlan and Sophia, for sharing so vulnerably your stories and your journey to this point, and for sharing for everyone listening what the passage of SEADRA could do for our communities. Today's reintroduction, with the support of our champions, Congresswoman Chu, Congresswoman Jayapal, Congresswoman Lofgren, and Congresswoman Presley, marks the beginning of the next phase of our work. We urge Congress to pass this bill, and what we know is that movements, people, are required to make this happen. SEAFN has long seen that the issue of stopping Southeast Asian deportation is the fight of our generation, the generation of refugees and children of refugees, to end the separation of our families and generational displacement now. So we're going to make a couple of asks. We invite everyone who is viewing today to sign and share our petition online if you haven't already, and to invite, if you're part of an organization, to sign on to support, or if you are part of, in your community, if there are organizations that you know, that you have relationships with, to also sign on to support. And so those links are going to be dropped, hopefully, as I'm speaking. And in addition, we're asking all of our community members to call and to write your members of Congress to urge them to co-sponsor this bill. Looking ahead a bit, 2025 is going to be a critical year for our community. It will mark the 50th anniversary, 50 years since the end of the US wars in Southeast Asia, also known as the Vietnam War, and will be a perfect opportunity for us to all come together as a community to push for the end of Southeast Asian deportation once and for all through Congress passing this bill. So we're asking all of you to join us today to make this possible. So now, with that, we're gonna transition over to a Q&A. Today, there's been almost 100 participants who've logged in to witness this, and also press contacts. Thank you so much for joining. And Quinn and I would like to invite the audience to drop questions in the chat, and we'll take a couple for responses. Okay, so this first question is actually, it looks like it's going to be for Congresswoman Chu. Congresswoman Chu, if you can come off mute, give you a second to do that. So the question is, as a co-lead of the bill, what do you want Congress and the public to know about this issue?
Well, thank you for that question. I want people to remember that this legislation impacts refugees who've lived the vast majority of their lives in the US and are not familiar with their countries of origin beyond escaping violence, war, and genocide there decades ago. At the time, our resettlement programs and mental health resources that serve these families were extremely poor. While children and adults face bullying, discrimination, and limited future prospects for economic success, our government failed to provide socioeconomic and mental health support. The choices that people made to cope with trauma and difficult lives decades ago shouldn't mean that they face the punishment of being forced to return to their places of birth after they've already completed their criminal sentences. That is double punishment. It only reinforces cycles of trauma and harm to families. I want Congress and the public to join us in efforts to break that cycle and to make sure that our promise to these refugees is met.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Congresswoman Chu. And, you know, one of my reflections in having seen you be a champion on this issue is that having a policymaker stand up to see the humanity of our community members and for that humanity to be restored means the world to these individuals and their families and their fight against deportation. And the next question is for our incredible speakers, Lan and Sophia, to share a little bit more about that lived experience. So our question for Lan and Sophia are, what does this legislation mean to you? What would it mean to you and your family?
I think this legislation, for me, it will just end the unjust detention and deportation of the Southeast Asian refugees who've already served their time and paid their debt to society. And it will also complete the cycle of healing for our communities who have suffered from this trauma of war and family separation. And it would just basically be justice for us.
Hi, this bill is not just important to me, but I think just to all the impacting folks out there that who are having deportation impacts. It means so much to me for this bill to be passed because working with organizer, I just do not want to see any people that sent back to the country that they already escaped once and they're not gonna do it again. That's the reason this bill is so important to me. I don't want to see like not just my family or my community get tore by, you know, take away from their own family and loved one. Also, whoever get deported back to their country able to have some type of release or reopen their case so they can able to come back to America with their loved one and family. And then also limited, you know, check in with ICE in person for the working permit that, you know, every 5 years, because working permit every year that we have to do it right now it costs so much money for us that I hope this bill could be passed so we can have a better life and have a chance to live as normal as other people. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Lon. So we're getting a lot of questions about the bill in the 118th Congress and what it would take to pass this. So this question will go back to Representative Chu. If you can name, what can we do to support, to build support for this bill in the 118th Congress?
Well, we have some wonderful co-leads. We have 4 people who are the co-leads of this bill. And while Congressmember Zoe Lofgren has been a champion on all immigration issues for such a long time, Congressmember Pramila Jayapal is the ranking member of the Immigration Subcommittee in the Judiciary. And we have Congressmember Ayanna Pressley, who has a large Southeast Asian population in her district. But we need more co-sponsors. So all of you live in a district represented by a Congress member. I would love for you to present this issue to your Congress member to have them sign on as co-sponsors. And I have to tell you, the stories of the 2 that spoke today were so compelling. I think it's really important to tell your story because I think that the vast majority of Americans do not understand how unjust this is. Now, they all remember the Southeast Asian War, but do they remember the consequences of what happened? Do they remember or even have any knowledge of what happened to the refugees who came here after the war? I think they would be very shocked to know what happened to them. And currently, well, Sophia's story was great, but she had the know-how to be able to appeal to the governor for a pardon. How many people know how to do that amongst anybody in America? How many people know how to do that and would have the connections to do that? To expect Southeast Asian refugees to do that is just ridiculous and burdensome and will not work. So that's why this bill is so important. I also would urge those of you who are in districts represented by Republicans to especially talk to them about this, because we need bipartisan sponsorships. The House currently is controlled by Republicans, and we need them to get on board for this bill to even have a ghost of a chance in this Congress. So I know that there are those of you that live amongst large populations of Southeast Asians that are in Republican districts. I hope that you especially can get your member of Congress to sign on to this bill, because having a Republican co-sponsor this bill will mean that it has an infinitely better chance to pass during this particular Congress.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Chu. Our next question is a little bit more about understanding the experiences of what it means to return from being deported. So this question is for Sophia. How can we better support returnees to integrate back into the community?
There's a lot of support that I needed, I feel, just for me alone, and to reintegrate back in America. It's financially hard, and emotionally, mentally, we need that support for just all the time lost from being physically with our families. I think not everyone wants, everyone has a passion for something. And just for like going back to school and education costs a lot. And it's just a lot of burdens there also. and shifting our lives once again after being deported. And I think just having that mental, emotional, financial help and support would be a big help in reintegrating back to the US.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Sophia. And thank you so much for sharing your story. You give so much hope to so many individuals who are also trying to fight to return home to the US. So we're so grateful for your analysis of what it really means to hold our communities whole and to heal through this next journey. This next question is a little bit more on the policy side. And I think we're going to have Nancy share this, respond, and then I can also add on. The question is, why does this bill create relief from deportability for people of certain nationalities instead of trying to change the grounds for deportation under immigration law?
Thanks, Quinn. So the first thing I want to say is that we see the Southeast Asian Deportation Relief Act as a bill that's in concert with other immigration reform bills that currently exist. So the bill that really comes to mind here is the New Way Forward, right? So the New Way Forward, for folks who don't know, and if anybody wants to drop some information in the chat, is a very critical and important bill that works to decouple immigration law and the criminal legal system in order to do things such as change the criminal grounds for deportability, right? So the way that we're trying to organize our community with SEADRA is to work to organize and mobilize Southeast Asian folks with removal orders with an eye towards how to build up their Congress folks' support for SEADRA for support of the New Way Forward Act. So that's the first thing. Like, we see this as connected. The second thing is we are also talking about a particular community's history with the United States, right? So Southeast Asian Americans that came to the US or were born in the US and whose parents were refugees specifically out of the United States conflict in Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. We see that there is a really important and particular history about how the United States needs to address the grounds for which, our communities came here, what kind of supports our communities did or did not get. And we see that this bill is part of rectifying that history too. It was a little bit long. Maybe Quinn, you could help.
I agree. I think that this is the first bill that speaks to the unique experiences of Southeast Asian Americans that just is not anything that we see compared to any other immigrant communities. And for us to be able to have a solution, to have solutions that come directly from our communities to not just finding relief for our communities, but to also expand the narrative around what is possible in the immigrant rights justice movement is also our hope, knowing that this may inspire other changes to the larger immigrant justice space and our immigration policies and laws long term. And I think we have time for one final question. And that question is, actually, I think this question can go to Nancy. Nancy, if you can remind folks again, what is different about this bill from the last session?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are two differences. And the first is that the new bill will provide a strengthened process for Southeast Asian refugees who were previously deported to return home. So it offers a process for folks to be able to reopen their deportation cases and vacate removal orders. So that's the first thing. But because there is an expanded, strengthened ability to vacate removal orders or deportation orders, that also applies to folks who are living in the United States. So it greatly expands relief options for both our folks who are living in the US with removal orders to fight their cases, and also provides a pathway for folks who have been deported to return home.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nancy. On behalf of SEARAC and SEAFN, thank you to our audience and our community for joining us from across the country and across the world. We are so excited for what Nancy described as the next chapter in this long fight for justice and healing and for liberation and freedom for our communities. Please follow us and keep connected on how we can mobilize and get this bill to win for our communities and for our families to be whole. Thank you all so much again. It has been such an honor to reintroduce the Southeast Asian Deportation Relief Act with all of you. Thank you.